recognizes the ranking member for opening statement. I yield to the ranking member for an opening statement. I yield back.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Distinguished gentlelady from California, Mary Bono. Gentlelady is recognized.
Chair now recognizes
the lady from California is recognized.
I'm pleased to introduce Congresswoman Mary Bono, former U.S. Representative for California's Inland Empire and Desert Region from 1998 to 2013.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Welcome to Sagely Speaking. I'm your host, Mary Bono, and I'm so happy you're here. On this podcast, I hope to bring you insightful conversations with a variety of guests from all walks of life, people with stories, wisdom, and perspectives that inspire and inform. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe, and if you feel inspired, leave a 5-star rating. It helps us reach more listeners like you. Now let's dive into today's conversation. All right. I am so excited to have my guest with me today. He's a friend, thanks to my husband. I'm honored and privileged to call him a friend. He is an astounding person, and he continues to just wow, I think, the world with what he is doing. Michael Lopéz-Alegría is chief astronaut at Axiom Space. He is a decorated astronaut who returned to low Earth orbit for the 6th time in 2024 as commander of Axiom Mission 3. Leading history's first private mission made up of all government-sponsored crew to the International Space Station. Welcome to Sagely Speaking, LA.
Hey, Mary. Good to be here. How are you?
I'm great. It is so great to see you and to have you here. And again, I watch you on TV with all the great things you do. And you're one of those people that I'm proud to say, I know him. I know him, and look at what he's doing. It is fantastic. But before we get into your space career, I wanted to talk to you about how you got into it. So you went to the Naval Academy, you're an aviator. Were you planning to be an astronaut at that point? Or is your career just sort of the yellow brick road that took you on a magical tour and you ended up as an astronaut? How did this happen?
Yeah, probably a little more the latter than the former. I wanted to be an astronaut when I was a kid, inspired by the moon landings, like a lot of people in my generation. But that lasted a few years from, let's say, age 11 to 14 or something. And then, I went on to want to be other things. I ended up, as you say, going to Naval Academy without really a plan. In fact, I thought I wanted to be a submariner.
Ooh, that's interesting.
It is, especially as I look back. About halfway through the academy, so in the summer, between your second and third year, you spend a week doing each of basically the 4 different warfighting specialties that you could select after graduation. One of them is nuclear submarine. So I spent 3 days on a submarine and decided that wasn't for me. And so I focused on being an aviator, but I studied engineering while at the academy. And I wanted to figure out a way to combine aviation and engineering. That's what test pilots do. So I started looking into becoming a test pilot. Coincidentally, around that time, Naval Aviation News, which is a monthly magazine that I don't know if it still does, come out talking about this or that aspect of naval aviation. The cover story and most of the issue was dedicated to U.S. Naval Test Pilot School. And in it was an article about all the graduates who had gone on to become astronauts. And they were the very same childhood heroes that I had when I was 11 years old when we walked on the moon. So at that point, age 25, the dream was reborn. And from that point on, I kind of did put my head down and pedal in that direction. But up until that point, it was a little bit dependent on the direction the wind was blowing.
I want to unpack a little bit this point about not being a submariner. I mean, to me, the claustrophobia, would be very severe. But then your career later as an astronaut and the things you've done, I mean, you have the record, right, for spacewalks. I mean, was it the claustrophobia of a submarine? How does that okay, what was it?
I would say 2 things. First is no windows. And so spacewalking and even on a space station, you have windows, right? And so the view of the Earth is probably one of the most positive parts of that entire experience. But the second thing, and I don't mean this to disparage that community, but I didn't feel kinship with the submarine community. And at the time, as a Naval Academy student, which is on the East Coast, my home was on the West Coast. And so whenever we had a few days off, I would try to go back and forth on what are called Space A or Space Available military flights. So I was spending a lot of time, like with aviators in their environment, and I kind of felt like those were my people. And I think it was more that than anything that really convinced me that aviation was probably the path that I should follow.
Well, seems like you took the right path for sure. I like windows. I can't imagine the submarine. I was on one once. We were not at sea, but when I was in Congress, I had a nice tour and dinner, and they would brag about having the best food in the military. Is that true?
I hear that as well. Well, the best shipboard food, I'd say. If you're land-based at an airport, you probably get even better food, but certainly the best shipboard food, they say, is on submarines.
There you go. Let's fast forward now to your space career. And there's so much to talk about. But something that's timely right now, of course, is what's happening with Suni Williams. And you flew ISS Expedition 14 with her, so you know her very well. How do you think, and I know Butch is up there too, the two of them, but since you flew with Suni particularly, I thought I'd ask, how do you think she's feeling about her 8-day flight turning into 8 months? At least she has windows, right?
She has windows. And she's with like-minded people. But I think, if there's a word I would use to describe Suni, it's resilient. I mean, she is tough. She was assigned to be part of the commercial crew cadre way back when and has been sort of plying that trade both with SpaceX and with Boeing for a very long time. And then she was ultimately assigned to the Boeing flight that kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed. And all through it, she's always got a smile and a positive attitude. And indeed, we're in contact. She's on board the ISS, as you say, but we speak regularly through email. She's in good spirits. I think the tough time for her and Butch was likely during that probably month-long period when NASA wasn't sure what they were going to do about them, whether they were going to come home. I think for anybody in that situation, it's the uncertainty that's the difficult aspect of it. Once they said, okay, you're coming home on Dragon, it's going to be February, I think they said, okay, now we have a plan. And, they just get up the next morning, put one foot in front of the other, and before you know it, it'll be February.
I think you're right. For me, it would be the uncertainty too. Just give me the plan, but don't change the plans. I know my temperament doesn't do so well in those circumstances. But talking about another one of your female colleagues, your Axiom colleague, Peggy Whitson, the two of you, are you the only people since John Young to have flown to space on 3 different spaceships, Shuttle, Soyuz, and now SpaceX Dragon?
No, they're a handful. I can name a few. Interestingly, like some of the 3 of the first 4 or 5 are all Japanese. I think it was just a coincidence. But Suni can now point to having flown on 4 vehicles, right? Because she will fly home on Dragon and, of course, Starliner, Shuttle, and Soyuz. So, yeah, it's a real privilege, though. I mean, putting yourself in the same paragraph as John Young is something that is pretty much the gold standard for an astronaut, for sure.
Absolutely. So of the vehicles that you did fly in, do you have a favorite?
It's kind of like asking a parent which is his favorite child in a way, but they're all different. They all have their charm, I would say. Soyuz is tough. It's small, it's uncomfortable, but it's very effective. It's very safe. It's very reliable. It's flown a lot since 1967. But going from that level of technology to the SpaceX Dragon is a couple of generations of leaps in terms of ability and comfort and intuitiveness of how the system operates. So I do really enjoy the Dragon, the way it's laid out, the way the interface works. It's very easy to understand. The information that you always want is present right at your fingertips. So if someone put a gun in my head, I'd probably pick that one, but you can never discount the space shuttle either. I mean, what an amazing vehicle. Sort of, I would say, flawed at the very beginning from the way it was designed to launch on the side of its propulsion element, which is a little bit treacherous, especially when you don't have a fairing to protect it, as we saw. But look, privileged to fly any spacecraft, so I'll take any of those 3.
You talk about the intuitiveness of Dragon. And I love intuitiveness. You can look at a 2-year-old now with an iPad and they know how to operate it and do so much with it. Definitely intuition plays into it. But intuition coupled with the training, of course, between the 3 spacecraft. I mean, how different was it for you? And you, on all of your missions, you've been the pilot or commander, correct? You've never been just a payload specialist. You've always...
I was a mission specialist on the 3 shuttle flights.
Okay. Why was that? Why would they stick a pilot as a MS?
Because at the time, actually, I think it's still the case, NASA hired pilots and mission specialists. And in order to be qualified as a pilot, you had to have 1,000 hours pilot and command time of a high-performance jet airplane, which I did not because my first fleet tour was in EP3, which is a reconnaissance platform with 4 engines, land-based. So I did not meet those minimum standards. And when I said, can we get a waiver? They said, look, we have so many qualified applicants. Why would I try to get one more in there? So it turned out, however, that I was fortunate enough to fly as a pilot in the T-38, the spaceflight readiness training aircraft that we have at NASA. So in a way, I got the best of both worlds because I was able to do a lot of spacewalks, which generally pilot astronauts are not allowed to do. So no complaints on that. But I was definitely a mission specialist on Columbia, Discovery, and Endeavour on the 3 missions I flew.
Oh, thank you. That's a great history to know. How about the differences in they flew in the ascent or the entry? Was there a huge noticeable difference between the 3? I would assume certain laws of physics obviously were consistent amongst all 3, but how is that?
I would say the Soyuz and the Dragon are similar. And the reason is because they both are liquid fueled all the way. So when you take the solid rocket boosters that the shuttle had out of the equation, you lose a lot of vibration, a lot of noise. So the Soyuz and the Dragon felt like the second stage after you lose the SRBs into space shuttle. It's just this very axial acceleration. Like you don't feel anything side to side. You just feel all in one direction, and acceleration just keeps going and going and going. And after 8.5 minutes, of course, you're right. The physics are the physics, and you end up basically at the same altitude and airspeed that you need to stay in orbit. And on the entry side, similarly, the 2 capsules are the same because they're capsules, right? So they have the same kind of aerodynamic qualities, a little bit higher G, a little bit more vibration. The shuttle is very gentlemanly, I would say. You know, it's like an airplane, very graceful. The max you ever get to is about a G.5 compared to 4.5 or so in the capsule. And even though they all feel like a lot more because you've been in space on microgravity for a while, the shuttle is definitely a more graceful and elegant solution. And of course, the touchdown, depending on who your commander is generally better than most commercial airplanes. So that's very different. The splashdown and what I like to call a series of explosions followed by a car crash, which is the Soyuz return when we land on land. Those are different. I was surprised at how different landing on land and landing on water is because we've all done a belly flop, right? And that feels like you may as well be jumping onto concrete. But the water landing was very soft compared to the very hard landing on the Kazakh steppe.
I can only imagine, but you must have missed the clang with the booster separation and all of the vibration and the fun. But from your first flight on to Dragon, was all the fear gone for the most part? Because it's a smoother ride and you're missing the vibration and the side to side and the clangs and obviously, bad things can happen. So there's some fear, but it sounds like for those of us who are my age, when you used to go to Disneyland, there was something called the e-ticket. And the e-ticket were the dangerous, fun, crazy rides, right? They don't exist any longer. But are they all still e-ticket rides, or is it automated, smooth? You're drinking your cappuccino and your latte while you're up there.
I am very familiar with e-ticket rides, having grown up not very far from Disneyland. Look, I think most astronauts will tell you that the aspect of fear is something that you have gotten rid of a long time before you ever get strapped in. Most of that is because of the training. I mean, you've literally done it 100 times, if not 1,000. By the time you go through the process of waking up, going up the tower, going across the access arm into the vehicle, having somebody get you strapped in, waiting for the countdown to get to 0. And so I think there's always going to be some element of, I would say, more curiosity than fear. But for me, what I noticed over the progression of those 6 flights is I have more bandwidth now to absorb what's going on from, I guess, a holistic emotional standpoint. The first time you fly, and I wasn't a pilot, but I was a flight engineer on Columbia, everybody has a job to do, and the shuttle is a fairly manual vehicle when it comes down to, especially when it comes to emergency responses. And so everybody's focused on their task. And I'm sure you've heard this before, but on the way to the launch pad, at the halfway there, they stop the vehicle and the chief of the office leads us all in the astronaut prayer, which is, please God, don't let me screw this up, right? So that's really what you're thinking about.
F word, LA.
Okay, well, I didn't know if this is a PC broadcast or not. But yes, they do use the F word.
So it is, please, what is the astronaut prayer?
Please God, don't let me fuck this up. And so you're thinking about your worst fear is not getting blown up. It's making a mistake that costs somebody, the mission or some aspect of, God forbid, the life of the crew. But as you progress through these different launches, even though I would argue that as a commander in the last two missions, my responsibilities are greater, I just feel more confident maybe that I'm not worried about making a mistake. I'm more attuned to what's going on around me, trying to really absorb the experience because it is so unique and so special. And I really appreciate that aspect of it because now I feel like I have a much greater possibility to capture the experience. And I try to transmit that to my crews. Of course, it's their first time, so they have a little more trouble doing it. But that idea of soak this up is really important to me.
What are you soaking up? What are your fondest moments, best moments? I know I've heard a number of the astronauts talking about the view of the Earth, of course, and no geopolitical boundaries and the fragility of the Earth. And I'm not meaning to put words in your mouth, but what are you absorbing with the capacity, the mental capacity to really take it in and to slow down, let your thought process and your emotions
The three
really
things.
feel?
The first is the physiological sensations in both launch and reentry, where you have those G-forces being exerted on you that are just probably something you've never experienced and never can experience because there's so much energy that's put into the system to be able to provide that it's remarkable and fun. The second thing, and you hit all the high points of it, is a view of the Earth, and nothing can prepare you for it. And if there's something that hasn't changed from one mission to the next, is how amazed I feel when I see the Earth from that perspective every time. And I've seen it a lot, but it's still magnificent, beautiful, unexpectedly marvelous to see that view. But the third thing, and I'm not sure this gets enough attention, is a sensation of floating. That is something I really can appreciate more each time. It's this sense of liberty and effortlessness with which you can move around and the tiniest little touches on something to go from one end of a module to another. Or in fact, if you're writing an email on a keyboard, you've got to have your feet secured or else the fingertip pressure from the keys will propel you in the other direction and you lose contact with the keyboard. And that amazement, it just keeps going. Now, these last missions have been relatively short compared to a 7-month mission on the station, but in the 2 or 3 weeks, it never gets old. It just gets more and more. I can't really believe this is happening.
Did you ever have the space adaptation sickness?
No, I really haven't had. My first mission was the worst, and I would categorize it as stomach awareness. And everybody's different. It's hard to predict. Some people who are combat fighter pilots get sick, and some people spend their whole lives in laboratories don't. But I've been pretty lucky, and that's something that does get better each time. And I think part of it is just knowing what to do or maybe what not to do. Like, don't move your head around. Try to keep your neck solid and your head anchored to your body, those kinds of things. Move slowly. But I've been pretty fortunate in that, and knock on wood.
Knock on wood. We'll continue with our interview in a moment, but first I'd like to thank my sponsors. Lucy Pet Foods is the leader in gut health. Their formulas for life feature prebiotic, balanced fiber that nourishes your dog and cat's total health. Every purchase helps support the Lucy Pet Foundation, a 501c3 charity helping animals. Save 15% off your first order and use the promo code SAGELYSPEAKING, all one word, and you will get free shipping at lucypetfoods.com. If you're committed to tackling the opioid and addiction crises, then you need to be at the 2025 RX Summit. Use code SAGELY, that's SAGELY, for an extra $100 off. Join top experts and professionals as we share strategies for prevention, deflection, treatment, and recovery. Don't miss this chance to be part of the change. Head over to rx-summit.com to register now. That's rx-summit.com for an additional $100 off. Mothers for Awareness and Prevention of Drug Abuse. driving solutions to prevent drug abuse and overdose deaths by focusing on prevention through education and awareness. And now, back to our interview. Well, let's talk about you, the flying with the newbies. So much of your career was working alongside highly trained professional astronauts. The NASA curriculum and training regimen is very tough, I guess, thorough. And then you go to the tourists or the non-professional astronauts. So for you, I can imagine that different complications, but you have the confidence. You said that you felt confident in doing this and leading these missions. But it must be different, whether they're the first time flyers, and I know you've flown with many of those, but when they're non-professionals, did you feel a different sense of responsibility? Or did you feel like you have to tell them, beware, or this is going to happen, or don't do this, don't do that? What was it like? Like, what if I said, hey, LA, I want to go up tomorrow? You'd go, oh, no, not again. Another newbie.
Well, you wouldn't go up tomorrow. We would go through about 8 months of training. And so I definitely wanted to draw a bright line between what we do at Axiom and space tourism. And I think space tourism is fine. Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic, with New Shepard and Spaceship Two. But that's very different from what we're doing. And so I would answer that by saying, first of all, yes, I do feel a very different sense of responsibility because they are crew members who have never flown before. They also are my customers. And so it is important to me that they feel that their mission is a success. So first, of course, is safety, but secondly is mission success. And my job really is to make sure they don't hurt themselves, safety, and make sure that they complete whatever it is their flight program is, which, by the way, generally looks a lot like a NASA mission. A lot of scientific experiments, technology demonstrations, outreach to their public, etc. So it's a different twist on my responsibilities, but I feel very confident that the people that we have signed up to these missions are very able and technically qualified to carry them out by the time we get to the end of the training period, as would you be, I'm quite sure. It doesn't take a rocket scientist. It doesn't take an athlete, a super athlete. It just takes somebody with a decent amount of common sense, the ability, to know which end of the screwdriver goes on the screw and which goes in your hand. It's really, I don't want to make it sound like it's trivial because it's not, but it is within the grasp of a lot of people. And I feel no hesitancy whatsoever to say that these people are ready to fly. And I'm quite confident if you want to sign up, I'd be happy to take you through that.
I have to start a GoFundMe or something, though, to be.
We might have to work on that claustrophobia thing, too.
Yeah. But can you tell us more about Axiom and what you're doing with Axiom? And I think you clearly pointed out that I lumped everybody into one big bucket, all the newbies of being space tourists, and I guess that wasn't correct. But what are Axiom? Because I know that you're the leading provider of human spaceflight services and developer of human-rated space infrastructure, according to the website. But can you tell us a lot more? That's a lot.
Yeah, so let me break it down. I would say we have 3 lines of business. The first, and the one that we were founded on, is to build the world's first commercial space station to succeed the ISS. So the ISS, amazing platform. I've been there 5 times. It's been in orbit, for over 20 years, doing world-class science every single day. It's a beacon of international cooperation, among other things, but mostly it's a laboratory. But it's a machine, and someday it's going to wear out. And when that day comes, we would like to avoid the gap that we had between the ability to launch Americans from American soil with the space shuttle, and for be able to do that with the commercial crew programs like SpaceX and Boeing coming up. So we want to have a platform in place from which or to which we can provide a seamless transition where NASA goes from owning the infrastructure to just being a user of it. So we sell them the service and they buy it by the yard. And at the same time, we can sell that same service or something like it to other entities, whether they be individuals, nations, researchers, companies, you name it. So that's kind of the guiding light for us. The second line of business are these private astronaut missions, which are really an offshoot of the first, meaning in order to run our own space station, we need to learn how to operate a mission. So on these private astronaut missions, we have, in fact, I'm sitting in front of our mission control here in Houston, from where we have a flight control team where we're developing the personnel, the training, the procedures, et cetera, that we'll use when we have our own platform in orbit. And the second aspect of private astronaut missions is it's helping us develop a market. So we've reached out to 7 or 8 countries already in the first 3 missions. We've got 3 more slated to fly on AX4, as well as some private individuals and all the researchers behind those people. So even the private individuals teamed up with research organizations from their countries in order to be able to use the microgravity environment on the space station to conduct those experiments. So this is kind of a microcosm what life will be like on the Axiom station. And the third thing, which was really not part of the plan, but has been a very welcome and I would say something that we are very proud of as a company, is that we won a contract from NASA to build the next spacesuit, next generation spacesuit that will be worn by the next astronauts that walk on the moon. Now, this again is not a contractor in the classical sense of the word, but we are building this thing with a lot of our own funds, but a little bit from NASA as well. But we're selling it back to them as a service. So that means we will keep the IP. We will be able to use those suits for other purposes as well. But NASA will be the primary customer, or they will basically buy the service from us. Now, the original contract was just for a lunar suit, and we were a follower on a different contract for the orbital suit that will replace today's extravehicular mobility unit, or EMU, that's been around since early in the shuttle period. The other company declared that they didn't want to be in that business anymore. So now we basically are getting more task orders to prove that we can develop an orbital suit as well. It's really a pretty similar suit. The only difference is different shoes, right? Because you're not walking on the moon. And so we look forward to testing out both those suits, the orbital suit on the ISS someday, and of course, walking on the moon whenever that happens in the Artemis program.
But Ellie, I have to ask the question about the Prada partnership. Is an Axiom partner
Yes.
with Prada, which is a top designer label. So where does Prada fit into this? I've seen it's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really part of what we're trying to do in working with these countries, in this case, Italy. So we're not just working with TASI, Thales Alenia Space Italia, which is the company that's building the modules, our shells actually of the modules, which is a very well-established space company in Italy. But we're going to other industries that are not necessarily in the space sector, like Prada. Turns out Prada has a lot of the experience and techniques and understandings that we need to build a spacesuit. I mean, obviously they have a lot of fame as designers, but behind all that is a lot of expertise in textiles and things like that. So these are collaborations that make sense from a technical standpoint, but they also involve, again, industries outside the space sector from other countries, which helps us grow this ecosystem of commercial spaceflight.
That is just fantastic and so interesting. When are you flying again? And who will you be flying with?
So we have a mission scheduled for Q2 of next year. It'll be commanded by Peggy Whitson, and the 3 countries that are participating are India, Poland, and Hungary. We are waiting for NASA to issue a request for proposals for the next private astronaut mission or 2 missions. We're expecting that sometime very soon, and we will compete for that. And it'll just depend on our customers, some of whom we have lined up already, as to who the commander is from Axiom. I want to mention that in addition to Peggy and me, we have a 3rd astronaut, Koichi Wakata, who was a classmate of mine as a class of 92 NASA astronaut class. Great guy, very experienced, 5-time flyer already. And obviously he's very well thought of, not only by NASA, but in East Asia, where he's based in Tokyo. And we're hoping that brings yet another dimension to our core. So we're excited to have him aboard, and who flies the next mission will just depend on a lot of factors. But I think all 3 of us will be chomping at the bit.
How many languages do you speak?
I will claim 4.5. I'm learning Italian. My mother, she was first generation American from Italian parents. Some of my aunts and uncles were born in Italy. And so I felt this desire to get more closely connected to that. So I'm learning it, but I'm only halfway there.
So your others are Spanish,
French, and Russian.
I figured the Russian for sure, but the French, that's something. You just translate and interpret for everybody up on ISS, I suppose. What's he saying? I don't know, ask LA.
Last time I was on ISS, there were 11 of us on board. And during that 2-week period, I heard 9 different languages being spoken, which is pretty interesting testament to the international part of International Space Station.
For sure. I have to ask a couple fun questions, if I might, though.
Sure.
And these came from other people. My husband teed some of these up. So, and for our listeners or watchers, if you're watching this on YouTube, my husband is a colleague of Mike's and fellow astronaut too. But he didn't give me anything juicy or any gotcha questions. But the first one he asked, you know how men think, at least how my husband thinks, how is the food with SpaceX compared to the government?
SpaceX doesn't provide any food. We provide that ourselves. We either buy it from NASA, or on the first mission, we teamed up with a celebrity chef, Jose Andres, a fellow Spaniard. And the problem with it is that there's no galley on Dragon, so there's no ability to heat the food, so it's all room temperature. But, I mean, you're not generally there for very long. It turns out on this last mission, I was there for a lot longer than I thought. 36 hours on the way up and 47 hours on the way back. But it's fine. You know, you can stand on your head for that long.
Does Jose now call himself the International World Kitchen or the
World Central Kitchen? Oh, yeah.
Now that he's not just on this world. Okay, when you go around speaking to people, let's say you're speaking to a group of kids, elementary students or high school, what is the number one question you get from an audience?
So I think Steve must have teed this up because I'm sure he gets it all the time too. How do you go to the bathroom in space? Now, I noticed that you just asked me what the question was and not what the answer is.
I know he doesn't like to answer that one either. But he does talk a lot about how the waste collection system, I guess it is technically called, malfunctioned a lot on one of his flights. And I always talk to people about how you can think about space engineers and rocket scientists designing a space shuttle, but the guy who designs the toilet is just as important as the guy who designs the launch systems. It's kind of a good thing on systems and corporations and treating your team right from top to bottom. What's the number one question you get from adults?
Probably, why did I want to be an astronaut? Which I think we've already answered.
Did you see aliens very often?
Yes, I get that. Sometimes I get, did we really land on the moon? And I've actually also, after a 30-minute presentation that I gave full of slides with images of the Earth, I had a person ask me, is the Earth really not flat? Seriously.
Really?
Yeah.
How do you respond to that?
So
I've ignorant.
Yeah. I've taken the approach now that when I get that question, which is pretty rare, but also the did we walk on the moon question, which is unfortunately not that rare, I sort of politely decline to answer the question because it's not worthy of an answer.
It's true, even in politics, right? When somebody has a belief that is so far different from ours, you can't convince them. You can't yell at them. Right. You can't argue with them. You can't change their thinking. But unfortunately with that, it does remove some of the mystique and just the inspirational aspect of space and everything that you have done and continue to do. And you are taking this all to the next level. And when you do fly next, I'm going to be so proud to say, I know him and he's my friend.
You are, or you're not going to be on that flight? Have we decided?
I'm going to start my training now. So I have to start by standing on my head for a few hours. Yeah. So, I'm one of the weirdos because I believe that there's nothing, I used to say there was nothing pretty above tree line. You might know I like to hike and fish and I'm a mountain kind of girl. And when I met Steve, that's what I told him, that there was nothing pretty above tree line. And that didn't go over so well.
Don't you live above tree line now?
No, I'm at 9,000 feet. We're at 9,000 feet. We're below tree line. But thank you for asking. You should come visit any time. But I think, is there anything else you'd like to say or to talk about with your vision for the future? And I don't want to get into all the political fights or funding fights or anything that are happening, but is Congress fully on board now? And are they, I know that you and I have talked over the years too, they seem to ebb and flow about the interest in space, depending on competing funding priorities, not within the space world.
Boy, that's a big question mark right now. As you know, with a fairly significant change in Congress and, of course, the leadership in the White House, I don't think anybody, well, at least I don't know how that's going to turn out. But I will say one thing that I think is uniting of all Americans of various stripes is the threat from China. And I'm not a military space person, so I don't know much about that. I hear that that is becoming ever more contested, and it's something to think about. But even when it comes to just leadership of human spaceflight, it's important for us to beat the Chinese to the moon. I think we have a plan to do that. I think if people start wringing their hands about spending this or spending that on it, that will be a unifying argument that will help move the chains down the field, because it does require significant funding. The architecture may change significantly depending on, well, based on the results of the election. And I don't advocate one way or another, but I do think that it is important for us to keep, I would argue that we are the leaders of human spaceflight worldwide today, but we have to keep fighting to maintain that edge. And I'm hopeful that regardless of whether you're blue or red, you believe that if you're sitting in Congress, the Senate, or in the White House.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's obvious for a lot of reasons, whether it's militaristically or other. But LA, you are such a great leader, and I believe that people look at you and see great hope and great opportunity in space, and I think that they know that there's a lot more to learn and a lot more to do. So I just want to thank you so much. I think I'm going to see you in a couple of weeks in Houston, if you're going to be there. And I look forward to that. We will see you and have some good times together. But I want to thank you very much for being here. And I hope you'll come back after your next flight and tell us what you learned and give us more great insights. But I know you've been very generous with your time today. And I just want to thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary. It's been a pleasure. I enjoyed our time together here. I'll take you up on that after the next flight invitation. And please say hi to Steve in the meantime.
I will. Thank you.
All right. All the best.
Thank you. And to my listeners, thank you very much for joining us on today's episode. I think it was absolutely fabulous and fascinating, and just a great man who was able to join us. I want to thank our sponsors, for without you, we could not do what we do. So until we catch you on another episode, be well.